don't have an extremist mindset. Don't be an extremist when it comes to your art or just in general. But before we talk about examples of art and also your input, I would love to have this be a discussion and what you guys think of it too. Let's just talk about some examples of extremism that has happened in our culture. So some pretty obvious examples is, the first I would say that comes to all our minds is politics. I think with politics in particular, we have been induced and provoked to this tribal mentality where it's about being on one side. We don't even talk about principles anymore. We don't even talk about what we hold dear. We don't talk about what is important to us, what we share as a community of real deep human principles, universal principles that can just expand all cultural backgrounds, principles that I would say marks the difference in a person, the difference of virtue and vice and all of that. But even so, even if it's something on the economy or something fiscally or something socially, we don't really talk about solving problems. Have you noticed that? We don't talk about solving problems. We just talk about the problem, what the problem is. And then we just slander people who disagree with us. We have a tribal mentality. It's about being on one side. And while being on one side, we hyperbolically express the good and the virtuousness of our side and the elemental evil on the other side. There's no middle ground. We have been conditioned to think that those who disagree with us are evil, at the very extreme, or at least not worth our time or our energy or our attention. And that's simply not true, because people even who have dynamic differences in opinion, they're still human beings, and they still need to be treated as such with respect and dignity. So I do think politics has just provoked an almost animalistic mentality where we don't have rhetoric, we don't have arguments, we just have insults and attacks and all of that. Now, for me, and I'm not saying this as a boast or anything, but I've always been quite neutral about politics. I'm not apolitical. I do have values. I do have things that I hold dear that I think are important. And if there's a candidate who upholds those values, I'm going to vote for that candidate. But overall, I am neutral about politics. I've always been, actually, ever since I was in high school. I remember a band teacher really, he didn't get on me for this, but he kind of he was pushing me to consider getting more into politics. And it was just a matter of interest. I said, well, okay, if I've got these principles, but that's it. I'm not going to spend my time on social media or a group of friends that just talk about politics. I'm not going to spend my time reading the newspapers. I'm not going to spend my time near campaigns or watching the news 24/7. I'm just not into it. Now, some people are. Some people have a great, incredible calling into politics, as a matter of service, and especially if they feel they need to be there. Yeah, absolutely. But as far as the actual energy we spend on politics, when really, sorry to say, there's really nothing we can, besides voting and sharing ideas in a diplomatic way, there's really not much we can change outside the officials in politics, and there are things we can fight, there are things we can stand against, but unless you're an official, it's really, I'd venture to say it is worth our time focusing on other things that fulfill us. So as for everything else, besides one or two major principles I have, as for everything else that politics is involved with, I tend to focus on things that fulfill me. Serving my church, being with family and friends, being a writer, being a musician, being a composer, and working to upholding a good, virtuous Christian lifestyle. That's what's important to me. So that's the first thing. I think that's the first thing. I think politics is the first thing that comes to mind. when we talk about extremism. And that form of extremism, just to recapitulate that idea, is where it's all about taking a side, choosing a side. And the side you're on is the right side, and the side you're not on is the wrong side, to the point where it's you're on the good side and others are on the evil side. And that is a form of extremism. So find common ground, then give your arguments. The next form of extremism, and by the way, this I will try to come from a place of grace, but I feel a little snarkiness coming, snarky sound engraver tonight. But the next form of extremism, I mean this in fun, I mean this lightheartedly. The next form of extremism is sports fans. Sports fans. Now, I'm not going to give examples. I'm not going to call out teams and teams that live or die by a winning game or losing game. But I tell you, I've had project managers I've worked with that were upset with me because I didn't follow sports. There was an actual visceral disappointment on me, on my person, because I didn't follow sports. I'm not against people following sports, but when I actually provoke someone to be angry with me just because I have no interest in sports, that's a small example of extremism. I have met sports fans that cannot understand why I don't follow sports at all. I've had female friends of mine who just did not like that I didn't watch sports because they felt like it was important for women to like sports, whereas I thought it was important for women to just be interested in what they're interested in. So no, I was never a sports fan. I was never into sports. And I guess you could call me a Huskies fan because I got my bachelor's in Seattle, Washington. But oh, you're from Seattle, you must be a Seahawks fan. Nope. Sorry. I just don't follow it. So when you actually provoke anger unwittingly, when you provoke anger in people because you don't follow sports, or at least irritation, that's actually abuse. That's an example of extremism, kind of actually coming, when you're becoming antagonistic to someone for not pursuing what you love. Might be football, might be something else. I love that people love sports, but I never got why people would actually be upset with me for not following sports. Sorry, sports fans. I'm sure most of you guys out there are decent. But this is more tongue-in-cheek. I promise. So that's the other thing where I kind of brought on the topic of sports fans because when you see that crazed attitude for a team, or when you're chanting a victory like you won a war, that I think that kind of that energy can have its place, but I think we tend to get very, very hyperactive about what we love. And I think this works in tandem, this hyperactivity and this anxiousness. I think this works in tandem with also politics. So that's why I kind of threw in sports in there as well. It could be true for people who love a certain television show. Sports fans is an example. It's not the example. So politics and sports fans. All right. So another example of things I have seen in social circles, things that can be a form of extremism where it is or it isn't, is in the academics. So a lot of students, myself included when I was a student, we go through this phase where we believe academics are all we need to judge the events or philosophies of the world. Or, academics are all we need to judge or ascertain the next event, or what to think or how to think or what to do next. And I think this tends to phase out when you leave the academics. You find the things that professors and doctorate students were adamant about, you find that they don't really mean much in life. It's you find that what they believe is true and firm actually holds place only in the academics. So an example is using art to serve. This is what I got from the music school when I was an undergrad in Seattle. That there was this idea that no, you're only producing art, or you're only composing music or using art to serve a select group of people. There was kind of this antagonism, this antithesis against composing music that has a wider appeal, or garners views, or something that is popular or well received, liked. That is kind of, it can come to a form of extremism if you stand against it. Well, the goal then is to produce music that is the opposite of that. Make your music as much as disagreeable as possible, as inaccessible as possible. That's a form of extremism for art in the academics. And then I saw that a lot. One form also is using your art only for activism and not for your own enrichment or enjoyment, or not for the delight of others. So that's a form where it's just no. I have this one direct, just one singular vision for my art, and that it's gonna be, it's gonna be for activism. Just an example, but that I had seen in the academics, where all of this was so important. I mean, there was an exaggerated push for this kind of thinking in the academics, and you find that when you leave the academics, it's like, I want to compose stuff I like to compose. I want to compose music that I like to produce and to share with others, and that's fine. So you start finding a neutral base. With me in experimental electronic music, I took from the academics, but then I really wanted to produce music I enjoyed listening to, and I'm still on that journey. So yes, academics. So we've got politics, sports fans, and academics. So let's go from the social to the artistic. I'm just going to use two examples. I'm going to start with electronic composers. So I think, by and large, I love listening to electronic music of all genres, and it could be accessible. It could be mainstream, not so much EDM. I'm really not into the mainstream electronic music. I'm more into the eclectic, downtempo, and ambient electronic music. But whatever the case may be, whether it's more mainstream or more experimental, that's a bit more unusual or not as popular, whatever the case may be, I have seen this among electronic musicians and composers on social media. And that is the general disdain, every once in a while, the general disdain of the word genre. And I have seen composers say, no, I write genreless music. Every once in a while. This is, in opposition to mainstream, or in opposition to being influenced by, or in opposition to producing what is popular. They don't like the idea of categorizing music. But the truth is, people categorize things in order to best remember them. So I would say experimental music is a pretty broad term. You've got lo-fi, you've got trip, you've got glitch, you've got trance, you've got ambient, you've got downtempo, just to name a few. But we need these categories. We need these categories in order to have a reference on where to expand our experimentation. But I see a general sense, this like, I don't want to be known for this kind of genre, or this kind of music style, or this kind of composer. I want to be my own thing. Well, that's great, but even if you take 5 different things, let's say you take bluegrass, folk, ambient, lo-fi, and jazz. Well, guess what? We're gonna read those. If you listen to enough music, you're gonna hear, oh, okay, that sounds a little bit like folk. That was composed in Oregon, for instance, or maybe European folk. Oh, I hear a little bit of jazz, maybe contemporary jazz or fusion, but I also hear ambient. Oh, I hear shoegazing. If you listen to enough music, especially enough different music, you're going to pick out influences. So your audience, if they do listen to a lot of music, your audience is going to think, oh, okay, they did low fidelity here, and then they did down tempo here, and it's fine. It's fine. It's just how you have been influenced. And so I actually think this is this kind of uh, um, I would say kind of snarky response, or kind of I would say that I've seen some tone and some comments that have been quite arrogant looking, where it's like I just write genreless music. It's like, no, genreless shouldn't really even be a word or a phrase. You're learning and you're producing art from something or a multitude of things, but you're still going to be under a certain category. So I actually think that rise against, that revolution against the word genre, I think that's it's a subtle form of extremism in my mind. Find your neutral base, find all the music you do like, all the music you do listen to, all the music you want to imitate and emulate, and then just roll with it. It's all good. So that's I think would be one example of kind of that. I am not going to be like this. No compromise. And the other example I'm going to do for the to give for the artistic practice is writers. So we talked about electronic music composers, but let's talk about writers. Okay, I have seen for writers, I have seen in response to ideologies taking over stories, which I'm against. I'm not for. I don't like that. But in response to ideologies taking over story, writers might work with a story that has no message because they hate a message in the story, or they hate an agenda in the story. So what do? Try to make a story work out where there is no message. But we do need messages for our stories. We do need morals. We do need themes. These ideas are imperative to story. So don't compromise the story in any way. But most good stories have a good message. Most good stories have a moral or a theme. I was listening. It was a few months back where David Stewart, the YouTuber, a wonderful channel on writing and commentary, he once expressed that he had received criticism for using a female protagonist because people had become so overly sensitive to feminist ideology taking over good stories, to where he would be, told, like, why do you have to be female? I mean, that's a form in terms of the audience, calling him out on that. That's kind of an extreme view, because really you've got male, you've got female. Chances are you're going to have a protagonist who is female. So that's one form of extremism from an audience side, from a critical side as a reader, which I think is unwarranted. I don't think just because you're overly sensitive to third wave feminism taking over stories doesn't mean you can't have a good female protagonist. And I have seen writers and illustrators, another example, I've seen writers and illustrators in response to third wave feminism that brings down the femininity, that makes the female more masculine. I've seen writers and illustrators they would overdo it. They would hypersexualize women as a direct response and opposition to third wave feminism. That's an example of extremism, that extremist mindset where it's I'm doing the exact opposite to what I don't like to spite you all. That's you don't have to do that. There's no pressure. There's no pressure to do that. But I have seen on Twitter that be used, that kind of provocative art be used as a statement against feminism. And I don't condone it, certainly as a Christian. I like my female characters modest, please. They can be cool too. and be totally modest. And they can look pretty too and totally be modest. But all that to say is it's just that idea to make a story in a direct response opposing an idea you do not like or an idea that you're uncomfortable with. No, let your art be natural, let it be organic, and just produce art you love. Why do we have the propensity to have this mindset? I have a few reasons. Community. We have the propensity to have this extremist mindset for different things, for a multitude of things, because of community. We tend to stick with people, or we tend to stick to people who have the same values and ideas. That's fine. That is okay until we demean and disparage those outside the community. We do want acceptance and belonging. That's a natural human need. But because of media, we have cultivated opinions as the means of acceptance and appreciation. Opinions should never be that important. People are worth more than their opinions. I'm worth more than my own opinions. I'm giving you my opinions right now and some theories to go along with that. But I, as a human being, as a human person, just a living, breathing miracle, as you are a living, breathing miracle, we are worth more than our opinions. And we have to treat others with that same dignity. The next reason is pressure. There's pressure to choose a side. So those who tend to stay neutral, like me, on most things, I've seen people, not myself in particular, but I have seen people, commentators, for instance, who are pretty neutral on different things. I've seen them criticized for not seeing the severity of the situation. Oh, you don't think this, you're not for this, you're not against this. Well, you don't know the severity of the situation. You don't know how heavy the situation is. And that's not true. Neutral people just tend to focus their energy on things that are really important as far as work and other things. It's really a matter of not wasting so much time and energy to disparage the other side. And I think the final reason I came up with for why we have this need to have this mindset is we want to be seen as different. There's this natural need among all of us, especially artists, especially here in the United States. We have this need to be unique. We have this need to be different or to stand out. And this could be healthy. We all have different traits. We all have different quirks. We all have different talents. That's fine, and that can be explored. But what I had seen in the academics, for instance, is that artists wanted to be so unique and to stand out so strongly that they and their art became rather inaccessible because they didn't really want their art relatable. Because it would maybe they had kind of this notion, well, if I make my art accessible, well, then it means it sounds like other people's art, and therefore I'm not unique. I mean, that could have been a notion. It could have been something I even struggled with as a university student. And I think with academics, in this needing to be seen as different, there's this general prejudice among artists against art that is well received and that is very, very popular. Very popular, I mean to say outside the academics. It could be that it wasn't unique enough, or that person isn't different enough, or that person isn't enough a revolutionary. So what's the solution? Well, try to do the exact opposite of the popular, no matter what that means. So again, that's an extremist mindset. You don't like something, you're against something, maybe you have a prejudice or a bias against something. Well, you do the opposite of that to spite that thing. That is not the role of an artist. That's not the role of an artist. Just, I do think some artists, I would say, I could say that there's a handful of artists that would probably feel fulfilled doing art just for that sake. But I would say it either be short-lived or it's very few and far between among artists. I think artists need to explore art and producing art that really gives them fulfillment and also delights other people too. And I actually don't think that's an extremist mindset. I think that's a pretty neutral, pretty tame mindset. What are the benefits of not being an extremist or have an extremist mindset? Well, you have the time and the energy to focus on the main thing. For me as a composer, composing. Because I don't concern myself with my music being genreless, I could take from all kinds of musical styles and influences at my leisure, and I could focus on composing. People say, "Oh, you sound too much like this." Well, what I mean, with all due respect, what do I care? I mean, if it sounds too much like this, fine. That's cool. That's how I did that music. Maybe it wasn't even intentional. But I think people who are so uptight about genre and are so against that word genre, I think that's actually a lot of mental energy to try to do something. Unless it's like a creative challenge that you want to do every once in a while, fine. If you want to sound so different and so removed from what people normally hear, cool. That's a good creative challenge. In fact, you might find really interesting things. I'm working in granular synthesis. That not many people work in granular synthesis in SuperCollider, but just granular synthesis in general, and I love it. And I'm going to find some interesting sounds and textures. But is it so important to me to sound completely different or completely removed from everyone else? No. In fact, I think that would be a lot more energy spent on that, where I just want to use that energy to compose. The second benefit is you will have a wider appeal. Your audience or your readership will include people of different backgrounds and different ideas, maybe even different languages and different cultures. So if you're not so caught up in being against something, like let's say if you're not so caught up about being against an ideology, well, what that actually might entail is a wider audience, maybe even an audience that includes people who have that ideology, because you're not so busy with it. You're not so involved with something like that. So I think not having an extremist mindset as an artist will give you a wider appeal, a bigger audience. And I would say, for me, at least in my experience, I could create art as a ministry or as a service to people, delighting people with my art with no strings attached. I would say, in general, don't use your art as an attack on people to prove a point. Don't use this to attack people you disagree with, and don't focus on the negative criticism you might get from your art for being neutral, so to speak. That's not extremist enough. Don't focus on negative criticism unless it's something that betters your art and your artistic experience.